Good evening. Hope everyone is doing well and enjoying the cold weather. Today we're starting on the bottom of Moed Kattan, Yud Dalet Amud Aleph. We're starting 6 lines from the bottom at Amar Shmuel. And today, what Moed Kattan is very well known for is a lot of halachos that speak about Avelus. And we'll be jumping into some of those halachos today in great degree. And we're not going to finish, but we'll learn a lot of the key sugyas that like when I was in Smicha, the sugyas that are learned when people learn Hilchos Avelus. Not all of them are halacha l'maisa. We will see there are some customs of old that people used to keep that we don't keep. But let's jump right in and learn some halachos here. So the Gemara says on Yud Dalet Amud Aleph, 6 lines from the bottom, Amar Shmuel, Kattan hanolad b'moed. If there's a baby that's born, not on Yontif, but literally during Chol HaMoed, and he has an excess growth of hair, which apparently was somewhat prevalent, as Rashi speaks about here, mutar legaleach b'moed. No problem at all. You're allowed to give this baby whatever haircut he needs. She'ein lecha beis ha'asur and gadol mizeh. Wow. Okay, that's interesting. There is no greater prison than being trapped in utero. That's what the Gemara says. And the Gemara makes a diuk over here. B'moed in. It's only true when the baby was born during Chol HaMoed. However, me'ikaralo, if the baby was born before Chol HaMoed started, on Yom Tov or prior, then he's not allowed to get this haircut. Asks the Gemara, Masi Rav Pinchas, Kol elu sha'amru mutar legalech b'moed. Any place, in any scenario where we say that one is allowed to get a haircut during the Moed, during Chol HaMoed, then we make an assumption that mutar legalech b'mei evlo. And had it also been that same individual was sitting Avelus, was sitting Shiva, then they too would be mutter, and the reverse as well. Ha'asr legaleach b'moed. Any case scenario in which one would be asr to get a haircut during the moed, then the halachos would go over a bridge. The comparison between the world of Chol HaMoed and Avelus has been established. And asr legalech b'mei evlo. That's what the Gemara says. But here's the problem: if we say by a Kattan that it depends, that sometimes it's mutter for him to get a haircut during Chol HaMoed, i.e. when he's born on Chol HaMoed, and sometimes for a Kattan he's not allowed to get a haircut during Chol HaMoed, such as when he is born on Yom Tov or before Chol HaMoed, then Nimtzeis, the implication would be that Avelos noheges beKattan. If the rule of thumb is that which is true during Chol HaMoed is also true during Avelos, then if a baby is at times not allowed to get a haircut during Avelos, if a baby is at times not allowed to get a haircut during Chol HaMoed, he's also not allowed to get a haircut during Avelus, when the child is an Avel. Says the Gemara that children have Avelus. Children don't have Avelus. Tanya, the Brisa writes, Mekar in the Kattan, yes, Taka, we do perform Kriya on a Kattan who lost an immediate family member. However, it's not for the obligations of the child, it's Mipnei Agmas Nefesh, it's in order to evoke an emotional response from the room. Take a look at Rashi on line 4, Dibur Hamasl Mipnei Agmas Nefesh, Sheyivku Haroin, that people will see this Nebuch scenario of a child having Kriya torn on them, the Yirbu B'chvod HaMeis, and they're going to have a greater covet for the mace by having more crying. There is no Avelus by a Kattan. So you wanted to say that anything that's true during Chol HaMoed as it relates to haircuts is also true during Chol HaMoed, during Avelus, but then that implies that a child has Avelus, which is not true. Amar Rav Ashi, no. Miktani Asur. Does it say that the bridge is perfect and that it's completely Asur? No. Dilma Yesh Mehen Asur, Yesh Mehen Mutter. Some scenarios, the bridge is not a perfect bridge. Not everything goes from the world of Chol HaMoed to the world of Avelus, and therefore it's possible that we still have our overarching comparison, but that no, a child would not in fact have Avelus. That's how we paskin halacha l'maisa, that Ketanim don't have Avelus. That's certainly true when they're under the age of chinuch, and above the age of chinuch, that's a different discussion in poskim as to whether or not we have something that we do al chinuch, not just for the kriya, which is mipnei agmas nefesh, but are there other features as well? But this is all version 1 of Shmuel. This was Shmuel, as we started with on the bottom of Yud Dalet Amud Aleph, but there is a second version of Shmuel, which is quite divergent from the first. 5 lines down in Yud Dalet Amud Beis. Hamemar, the Temer of Shisha Bred Rav Idi, Masni Hachi. They taught this sugya as follows. Amar Shmuel, Kattan mutar legalcho b'moed. We're allowed to give a haircut to a newborn child during Chol HaMoed. Loshna nolad b'moed, v'loshna nolad meikara. Whereas the first version of Shmuel only allowed him to get a haircut if he was born during Chol Chol HaMoed. This version of Shmuel doesn't care. There's no distinction. A child can get a haircut during Chol HaMoed, period. End of conversation, no problem at all.
A newborn gets a haircut?
That's what Rashi says, right? Yeah, Rashi says on the bottom of the previous page, it wasn't uncommon, or I guess, I don't know if it's still common. I can tell you as a mole, there's some babies who just have like a full head of hair. Do they need a haircut? I don't think so, but okay, that's maybe what they did. That's so Rashi indicates on the bottom of the previous page, explaining our Gemara that wasn't uncommon. And says the Gemara, this new version of Shmuel shows no distinction between a child getting a haircut on Chol HaMoed if he was born during Chol HaMoed or even if he was born before. And Amar Pinchas, we've already learned this idea. Afana Nami Tanina. Where did we learn this? Well, the Brisa writes, Kol Eilu she'amru muter legalech b'moed, muter legalech b'mei evlo, or asurin legalech b'moed, asurin legalech b'mei evlo. Because we had already learned the principle that there is a link between Chol HaMoed and Avelus. And had it been that we said that a child had any isser of haircuts during Chol HaMoed, then Yanis Kattan Asr. Had there been a scenario in which we would have said that a Kattan is not allowed to get a haircut during Chol HaMoed, then it would have implied Nimtzeis Avelus Noheges Bekatan, and that can't be. The Tanya and the Brisa writes that that's not true. Mekar and the Kattan Ibn Agmas Nefesh. That yes, we do perform Kriya on a child who lost a loved one. However, that's not for the sake of his own chiyuv. That's for the sake of Agmas Nefesh. And as Rashi highlighted earlier on the page, on the fourth line, it's to be Marbe B'Kvod HaMeis by having people cry more intensively. So Amar Rav Ashi, Miktani Ha'asurin, it says, how can you might not have necessarily have learned it that way. Maybe the bridge between Chol HaMoed and Avelus is not so perfect. Some things could be allowed. Dilmi Yesh Mehen, Asur V'Yesh Mehen Mutter. So that's the end of the conversation that we started with today. And the Gemara doesn't present a response, but it does appear that there are two approaches in the Gemara. One is to say that a child who's born on Chol HaMoed is allowed to get a haircut. And one version of Shmuel says that he can get a haircut no matter what. The Gemara is inconclusive and moves on to the next topic, 1/3 of the way down to Yud Daled Amud Beis. And now we're going to learn a very, very important Gemara, and one that's well known as well, which is that when one is sitting Shiva, it is interrupted by Chag. That we know, in the sitting Shiva is bad enough. But if I have to sit Shiva and it gets interrupted, that's even more difficult. And then the Erev Yontif is difficult because people are running around like chickens without heads. So says the Gemara, Avel, Eino Noheg Aveluso Viregel. If you have an Avel, he's not allowed to fulfill the customs of Avelus when there's a regel. How do we know that this is the case? Because the pasuk in Chumash writes, "Shene'emar v'samachta b'chagecha," and then the Gemara declares two different parts of a chakira. Avelus temei karahu. If a person's Avelus began before the holiday started, then asi asay de rabim v'dachi asay de yachid. Then what we're going to do is we're going to look at the halachic statuses of each person. You have the tzibur who has a mitzvah saseh of Yom Tov, Simchas Yom Tov, and you have the Yachid who has a mitzvah saseh of Avelus. And because one is a much larger group than the other, therefore the aseh de Rabin, the aseh of V'samachta b'chagecha, is stronger than the aseh of the Yachid, where he has to keep Avelus. Just to add as a highlight, it's very rare that a person keeps Avelus midoraisa. The only time, according to some Rishonim, that Avelus is actually Doraisa is when the Misa and the Kvura are in the same day. So in America, that Kimat Velo, that almost never happens here. It can happen, it's rare. Usually in America, it's a day, 2 days. In Eretz Yisrael, it can happen. And that's a big nafkamina. The nafkamina would be, is if you're talking about a burial and a misa and burial same day, that makes that day a din doraisa, mitzvah saseh shel Torah, to have avelus. Mashein kain, in most cases where this shaila would never get off the ground. Of course, for avelus by us, which is by and large the Rabbanan, of course it wouldn't trump. Of course, it wouldn't trump a chag, but even here, which is a bit of a chiddush, even though it may be doraisa under certain circumstances, we still would not say that it's docha Yom Tov, because the aseh de Rabim is docha the aseh de Yachid, and that's under the assumption that the mace died before the holiday. If the person died in the midst of Yom Tov, on Yom Tov or on Chol HaMoed, lo asi aseh de Yachid v'dachi aseh de Rabim. The mitzvah aseh of v'samachta b'chagecha is already in place, and we're not able to remove it with this aseh of that one person who in the same day buried the person. We can be medayik from here that it's not the first day of Yom Tov, because otherwise, how could you bury the person and have burial to make it Toraisa? Fine. End of that sugya, to some degree. Now the Gemara is going to ask, wait a minute, a menuda, a person who is put into excommunication, what about him? how does he compare? How does he hold up to an Avel? We know that an Avel, his Avelus is interrupted by the Yom Tov, no matter when the mace dies. What about a Menuda, a person who's in an excommunication? Would we assume that he has to maintain his excommunication status, which includes the forbidden, he's not allowed to wear an ilas sandal, he's not allowed to do laundry, and as well, we are not allowed to say shalom aleichem even to someone who has been nidui, someone who's been put into excommunication. What's the din? Amar Rav Yosef, let's try and figure it out from the following. Halfway down Yudal Amud Beis, fascinating Gemara. Tashma, we have a brisa done in dine nefashos v'dine makos v'dine mamanis. On the holiday, the Beis Din is going to adjudicate cases that are life and death, cases about malkos and cases about money, and as well v'ilot tzayis dina. If there's a person who doesn't listen to the Beis Din, misham tinanle, then even on the holiday, they're going to put this person into excommunication, even on Chag. So says the Gemara, a beautiful svar. If you want to say that he's not going to have nidui on the regel, namely that the regel will interrupt his being in excommunication, then how can it be the case? Mishumas va'asi meikara asi regel dachila, but hashta mishamtinan le'anan. If he was put into shamta, put into nidui, he was put into excommunication before the chag, then the regel interrupts, but then the chachamim and Sanhedrin will put him into nidui on Yom Tov. That's a stira minei ubei. That doesn't make any sense. So therefore, it must be, says the Gemara, answering its question with a question. It therefore must be that a person who is a menuda, their regel, their menuda does not get interrupted by a regel. Amar le Abaye lab dafka, that's not true. The dilma, perhaps all that's happening on the holiday is le'iyune bedine, is that the chachamim are sitting down to learn up the sugya about what you did and whether or not you're deserving it. But they're not necessarily paskening that on you. Dilote mahachi, because if you don't say that, if you don't say that they're just analyzing what the halacha should be, then we run into another problem. Dilote mahachi, then dine nefashos de katani, hachanami de katlin. Would we perform capital punishment? Would we kill someone deservingly so, who was deserving of misas bezdin? Would we kill them on the holiday? You're not allowed. Why are you not allowed? Not because it's usher per se, but because, says the Gemara, 2/3 of the way down, the executioners, the Sanhedrin, that's a lack of simchas yontiv if they have to kill someone, not even because of the killing. The Tanya, Rabbi Akiva Omer, minayin l'Sanhedrin, shahargo es hanefesh, shein toamin kolos hayom. How do we know that if a Sanhedrin performs an execution in the morning, they cannot eat the rest of the day? Talmud lomar lo sochlo al hadam. So therefore, says the Gemara, if the Sanhedrin were to mete out an execution of capital punishment, dalad misos bezdin, so then they're not allowed to eat the rest of that day, and it's chol hamoed, and that's a bittul of simchas chol hamoed. That's unbelievable that we're saying that the reason you can't kill someone on Yom Tov who is deserving of being killed is because of simchas Yom Tov. That's an unbelievable idea. Says the Gemara, it must therefore be Ella, just like over there, it must be le'iyune bedine. It must be that in the case of the horeg es hanefesh, in the case of dine nefashos, is le'iyune bedine. So too by the case of shamtina and by the case of a menuda, it's also hachanami le'iyune bedine. So we don't really have a good answer. If what you're saying is true, that they're just going to sit and learn the sugya, but they're not going to tell the person what the psak is that he belongs in nidui, then you're me'ana es dino, you're holding off on the din, and you're not allowed to do that. So says the Gemara, rather it must be like this. The asumit safra, everybody woke up early in the morning. They learned the sugya. And after they learned the sugya about what this person needed to do, they may need to die. They left the Sanhedrin. They went and they had all the simchas achag. They ate all day of chol hamoed. They showed up right before shkiyas achama. In the case of dine nefashos, they did mete out the punishment because you're not allowed to delay the psak. Im kvar that you're sitting down to pask in the din, then you have to mete out the execution on the same day. By simchas Yom Tov, great, eat first, because the only limitation of lo sochlo al adam is after you've meted out the execution, then you have a problem. Otherwise, you're good to go. Michael?
Loophole.
I mean, I don't know if it's a loophole. It's just that the rule is that from after you mete out the punishment of dine nefashos, you're not allowed to eat. There's no din to do it in the morning, so they did it in the afternoon before Shkia, and that way they had 10 minutes of no eating, and then they were not mevatel simchas. I'll say more than that. That's the only way to understand the brisa, because the Gemara is saying they did din nefashos and chol hamoed. How do you do din nefashos and chol hamoed if you're not allowed to kill someone because it involves a mania and simchas? The answer must be that they did it in the afternoon and ate first. Otherwise, so I don't know. It's not really a loophole. It's kind of we're utilizing the halacha as it's meant to be used, and you have no choice on chol hamoed. It has to be done that way. Right. You're not delaying the din, and you're also not violating lo sochlu al adan. You managed to kill two birds with one. Oh, it's a bad mashal, a bad turn of phrase. Sorry. Anyways, says the Gemara as follows. We are right now about 15 lines from the bottom of the page, and as of now, we don't really have an answer to our question. The question we've been trying to answer is, what about a menuda? Is that interrupted by his regel? And the Gemara seemed to not have a very good answer. Let's try another answer. Amar Abaye Toshma, we have a brisa. Menuda sheitiru lo chachamim. The brisa says that there's menuda that the chachamim allowed him to be released from the pressures and from the responsibilities and limitations of being in nidui. Says the Gemara, maybe we should see from here that one is therefore allowed to have their nidui stop at regel, that regel will interrupt the nidui. Says the Gemara, Amar Rava, pay attention to the words. Miktani sheitiru chachamim. It doesn't say that the chachamim freed him up. Sheitiru lo chachamim. This guy made it so that the chachamim would be matir him. How so? Ktani. That's what the Brisa writes. What did he do? To Azal, the guy who's in nidui, he went upaise labaldine. He went over to the person who he owed money to. And after he paid up his dues, he showed a receipt from the Baal Din, from the Toveya, and he said, "I paid my dues." They said, "Fine, now you're not in nidui anymore." That's why, in that case, the regel didn't interrupt him. It's just that he was out of nidui. That's not the same thing. So no raya. So the Gemara doesn't answer the question. Next, 6-7 lines from the bottom. Mitzora. What about a person who's a mitzora? Mahu sheyinhog tzaraso v'regel. This person has a lot of limitations. They're not allowed to be in the machane. They're not allowed to get haircuts. What about the regel for a mitzora? Do we pause? Do we put pause on the limitations of being a mitzora as it relates to a regel? So Amar Abaye Toshma. Let's see. V'hanazir v'hamitzora mitumaso l'taharaso. That when one ends the tuma, so then they go from one to the other. That's when he's allowed to get a haircut. That's what we said yesterday. Says the Gemara, habi meita tuma so nohig. It therefore implies that only when he goes from tuma to tahara is he allowed to be free of his limitations. However, if he's still in his yemei tuma, then seemingly the regel will not interrupt him. Says the Gemara, that's not necessarily true. Maybe what's happening is a lomi boya kamar. We're saying not only this, but even that. What would this not only this, but even that mean? Lomi boya bimei tumasa delo nahig. I totally understand that you're not going to be able to break the rules of the regel because of your tuma, avala taharaso. Even when you become pure, maybe I would argue nigzor shema yisha korbanosab. I still wouldn't allow you because maybe you're going to mix up your korbanos and accidentally do it on Yom Tov instead of Chol HaMoed. Ayin Rashi with 5-6 lines, not now because we don't have a lot of time. We have a lot of Gemara to learn. The Rashi there speaks about this concern, Kamash Malan, that's not the case. So therefore, we have two possible ways of understanding this Gemara, and therefore we don't yet know whether or not a mitzora is interrupted by a regel. So the Gemara provides a second response, 4 lines from the bottom, whether or not a mitzora's limitations are uprooted by a regel.
Yeah, but to be called a mitzora, he has to be called before Yom Tov, right?
Yeah, but we're talking about getting out of your mitzora status. We're questioning whether or not, just like by avelus, a regel interrupts avelus.
Right.
Does a regel also stop the limitations of a person who's a mitzora? That's what we're asking, not about becoming a mitzora. You're right about that for sure.
Right.
The Kohen has to paskin on that. And there we did allow for flexibility. We saw that many blot ago.
Right.
So we're talking on the other end of the process of getting out of your tuma status of mitzora, or you're midstream as a mitzora. It's day 4 of your mitzora muchlat. You're definitely a mitzora, and it's sukkis. Now what? So that's what the Gemara is trying to answer. And Rava provides a second answer to this question. Omar Rava, Toshma v'hatzarua, there's an extra word in this pasuk, an extra letter, I should say, which is the letter Hey. I'm just going to speak quickly without Rishonim here because, again, we don't have time. V'hatzarua is l'rabos Kohen Gadol, is that if you have a Kohen Gadol who becomes a mitzoro, he does have some limitations. V'ha Kohen Gadol, the kol hashana kiregel lekule al madami. This Kohen Gadol is similar to a Kohen of year-round. Ditnan, what does the Mishnah write? Kohen Gadol makriv onein. When the Kohen Gadol is an onein, he can still bring a korban. However, ve'eno ochel, he's not allowed to eat. Shma mina noeg tzaraso beregel. We see that he still has limitations as a bar tzaras, even in the regel shma mina, that it doesn't interrupt. Very interesting that he can be makriv as an onein. We know that aninus has a period in halacha between the time that a karov dies and the time that that karov is buried, provided that meso mutal lefanav. If you have a burden, a responsibility to bury that person, then things are different. There's a huge nafkamina here. Let's say that Rahman al-Islam, a person dies, and you have 2 children of the mace. So one of the children goes with the mace to bury them, and the other one stays back in America. They have a different shiva. The one who's traveling with the mace, it's still mesa muta lefanav. His shiva doesn't start until burial, but the one in America, he already parted ways with the mace and with the brother who's going to bury that person. His shiva starts right now. So that sometimes you'll see a staggered, if you ever look carefully in the emails, person X is staying in America, their shiva starts Tuesday, and person X is going to Eretz Yisrael, their shiva starts Wednesday or Thursday, whenever the misa is, whenever the actual, not misa, whenever the kavura is. Anyways, that's what the Gemara says over here. That we in fact see that tzaras still applies even biregel. The next halacha is avel aser b'tispores. That the halacha is that an avel is not allowed to get a haircut. So let's learn some of the halachos here. Midika amar lehu rachmana livnei Aaron, because the pasuk in Chumash says after the death of Nadav and Avihu, last line of Yodalim and Beis, what does the pasuk say? Roshechem al tifro, don't grow out your hair. Meaning they were told to cut their hair. That implies that everybody else, if you need a pasuk and chumash to tell them what they should do, it has a backhanded inference that everybody else is not allowed to get a haircut, and that's taka the true. That's taka the case. We have a minhag that if there's a person who's in avedus, they don't shave for 30 days. And if it's for a parent, so then they grow their beard until people start to call them out on. They're like, "You guys, time to shave," So for my brother, my beard was disgusting. Everyone was making fun of me on day 12. Forget about day 30. So day 30 hit. I didn't wait another minute, and we did a lot of before and after pictures. And I'll show you another time. That's what the Gemara says, and therefore an avel, based on this inference from the pasuk in Chumash, therefore an avel is not allowed to shave. And this is how we're going to see this pattern. We have these 3 groups of people who have overlapping halachos. We have an avel, we have a menuda, and we have a metzora. And for all the halachos we're going to learn, just as we did on Yodalim and Beis, we're always going to be comparing and contrasting the law that we learn in Avelos with the world of a menuda and a metzora. So we just learned that it's usher to cut your hair. Asks the Gemara on Tezvav Amud Aleph on the top line, what about menuda and metzorain? Mahen b'tisporas. Says the Gemara, we have a brisa. Toshma menuda and metzorain asur and l'saper u'lechabes. That's pretty simple. Says the Gemara, as an aside, menuda shemes, if there's a person who dies while they're still in nidui, while they're still in excommunication, Bezdin soklin es arono. The Bezdin stones their casket. To be clear, this isn't throwing stones, but they put a lot of stones on the casket. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, no, they don't put a lot of stones. He says, lo sheyamdu alav gala avanim kigalo shel achan, like the famous story in Yoshua, who took from the spoils, not like him, where they piled on a huge thing of rocks. They only put one on top of his aron. Fine, so that's a side din. But basically, if a person dies benidui, so then they put stones on their casket. Not to be confused with the minhag is a bit of a unique word of putting stones on top of a tombstone when you go to visit someone. That doesn't mean that they were excommunicated.
Robinson has spoken about this
really
a bunch of times because it really bothers me. You can't really find the svarim. That is one of the svarim given, and perhaps if a person was chayiv nidui, so they're in bad shape, you're freeing them up. So
this is a kapara.
Some people say
so. He thinks that
again, it's explaining a minhag that exists,
a custom that exists that's not rooted in the Marim.
Nobody can quite tell you where it comes from. That is one of the svarim given. He's spoken on this a bunch of times.
Brilliant.
Because it's
who knew? Brilliant. Very unusual. I do it myself. I just do it because there's other stones there. I'm just a follower.
But maybe you can tell me why.
No, you just told me why. But the Gemara doesn't.
It's lonely. It's lonely there. So Nechama could have sold it.
someone's visiting it.
I've heard that too.
Is that forever or for the first year or?
But the Gemara doesn't say it's a kapara. The Gemara
Right.
just says it's what you do.
Yeah.
Doesn't it?
I hear
That requires Rishonim, because the Gemara, the pashtus of the Gemara is that it's close. It's closer to Onish than it is to kapara. At least that's how it appears.
David, I
Wow.
want to tell you that in Augusta, Georgia,
Yes.
they put golf holes on.
I
No, I'm serious, they do.
believe
That
you.
is awesome.
I believe
And
you.
because the weather is so nice, they don't even fall off, you
You
know.
reach in your pocket, you gotta-
Golf
everybody has a
balls.
hole in their pocket. It's-
They're in the middle of golfing when they go. All right, 8 lines down. Thank you for sharing that. I've never heard that. That was a big chiddush. I've never heard that before. That's beautiful.
It's been something that I think, has been bothering me.
Yeah. Great. All right, we got 25 minutes and 100
All right,
lines of
let's
Gemara
go.
to learn. No, you can talk. That was great. It says the Gemara, Avel chayav ba'atifas harosh. This is a custom that did not carry over, but it used to be the case that a person who was an avelus would wrap their head. Where did this come from? Yechezkel, his spouse, had passed away. The lo sa'ateh al safam. You should not wrap yourself up to your lips. Bechlal tikuli alma. That everybody else is chayiv in this. And as the pattern continues, what about a menuda? Menuda mahu be'atifas harosh amar Rav Yosef Toshma. The Brisa writes, "Ve'hein misatvin ve'yoshvin ki menuda nuche avelim ad sheirachem oalem min hashamayim." That maybe we can say the same thing would apply by a menuda. This Mishnah that we just quoted, this Brisa, is from Maseches Tainis, and that is that we are effectively like a menuda when we have no rain. So therefore, we're quoting this Gemara from Tainis about when there's no rain, that we're going to sit there until there's rachamim. So therefore, maybe there's atifas harosh, because it said v'hein misatfin. Amar le Abaye, I don't know if that's a good comparison. Dilma menuda l'shamayim shani d'chamir. Maybe over there in Maseches Tainis, when the gzeir of no rain comes from shamayim, so maybe over there it's chamir. It's more strict than what we have down here when Bezdin puts you into cherem. No, okay, so Bezdin put you in the cherem. That doesn't mean that a Kodesh Baruch Hu thinks you're a Rasha. It just means that you got work to do. Fine. Okay, so we don't really have a clear answer there. We're going to come back to this. Mitzora, mahu be'atifas harosh. Does a mitzora, a leopard, does this person have to cover their head? Toshma ba'asafam yatem michlal shechai be'atifas harosh. Mamina, the answer seems to be very clear that yes, that we make an implication from the pasuk that they are chayiv and atifas harosh as well. Avel aser lahaniach tefillin. A person who's in avelus, it's forbidden for them to wear tefillin. We don't paskin this way. We paskin that an onain doesn't wear tefillin prior to burial, but an avel taka does wear tefillin. We've all been, unfortunately, to shiva houses, and everybody puts on tefillin. It's really just the aninus, which is a problem. So let's learn the Mari Makomos of this. We're not going to get into this sugya now, but it's an interesting sugya to learn. How do we know that an avel, at least in this frame, should not wear tefillin? When Yechezkel's wife died, he put on tefillin. He was told by Hashem to put on tefillin. That implies that others are not supposed to. What about a menuda mau b'tefillin teku? We don't know the answer to that. Mitzora mau b'tefillin. Let's see. Tashma behatzaru l'Rabbas Kohen Gadol begadav firumim shiu mikuraim. That when the pasuk says that it's begadav firumim, so that teaches us your clothes should be shorn. Shia mikurain, that we should tear kriya. V'roshia parua, your hair should be grown out. In priya elagidol seyar, divi Rabbi Eliezer, but Rabbi Akiva differs on this. Rabbi Akiva omer nemra havaya birosh. The pasuk says v'roshia parua havaya. Here is a reference to the word yihyeh. V'nemra havaya bibeget. It also says yihyeh by the word beget. Ma havaya ha'amur bibeget davar shechutz migufo. Just like when we talk about kriya, it's not something that's on the body, but something that's external to the body. So af havaya birosh, even when we refer to the head and it says yihyeh, it doesn't mean the hair. It's davar shechutz, it's migufo, my lava tefillin. Doesn't this seem to imply that we're talking about tefillin? Says the Gemara. No, it doesn't imply that at all. Amar Papa, maybe it's his hat. Lo, it's akumta v'sudra. Maybe it's his hat. Maybe it's his head wrap. So no way to compare. We don't know. Avel aser b'sheila shalom. This is halacha l'maisa. You are not allowed to say the sentence of shalom aleichem. The phrase you cannot say shalom aleichem to someone who's in avelus. By parents, it's for the whole 11 months, 12 months that we have that restriction. For an avel, for his parents, that he has that restriction. How do we know that this is true? You should remain silent, and this silence is interpreted as not getting a shalom aleichem. Same pattern. Menuda ma v'sheila shalom. What about a menuda? Amar Rav Yosef tashma v'sheila shalom shebein adam lechavero kibnei adam ha nizofen lamakom. It's like someone who's been rebuked by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that's what the Gemara says, that there is some type of she'ilas shalom. Amar le'abaye dilma menuda l'shamayim shayni dechamir. Maybe things are different by a menuda because that came from upstairs, says the Gemara. Therefore, we don't have a good answer about the menuda. What about a mitzora? Mitzora ma'u b'she'ilas shalom tashma v'asafam ye'etesh sivsosab medubako zubazu. Your lips should be stuck to one another. Shehekim menuda u'cha'avel v'asar b'she'ilas shalom shma mina. So we see that one is therefore not allowed, just like menuda and avel. The word menuda here is difficult, but therefore there's no she'ilas shalom shma mina. V'nifshat minad la menuda. Why don't we use this brisa to explain the lack of clarity that we had by menuda? Because we didn't know before whether or not the menuda was allowed to have she'ilas shalom. Amar Ravacha bar Pinchas mishmed Rav Yosef, you can't. Miktani sha'aser. Even in the brisa over here, where we are able to extract information about a mitzvah, we learn from the psukim there, but it doesn't say that she'ilas shalom is aser. It just says she'ehei menuda u'cha'avel ktani. Maybe it's talking about other things, and when it says v'aser nami she'ilas shalom, that's only talking about a mitzvah, and it's not talking about a menuda, and therefore we don't know the answer. And as well, another halacha, 2/3 of the way down, Tes Vav Amud Aleph, Avel Aser B'divrei Torah, you're not allowed to learn Torah when you are in Avelus. Midikam Rachman Lechezkel Dom. From the word dom, which means silence, we learn that one should not be learning when they are in avelus. Same pattern. Menuda ma b'divrei Torah. What about a menuda? Says the Gemara. Amar Rav Yosef Tashma. The Brisa writes menuda shona v'shonen lo. He can learn. He can teach it. He can learn v'shonen lo, and he can be taught to. Niskar v'niskaran lo. He can also hire and be hired. But muchram is a worse. It's a higher level of excommunication. Even worse. If someone's muchram, lo shona v'lo shonen lo, he cannot learn either way. Lo niskar v'lo niskaran lo. Aval shonu la'atzmo. He's allowed to learn by himself, and at the same time that this muhram has a higher level of excommunication, but still, he can set up like one of those little, those places that, not a bookstore, but like the things on the corner by where Vogue Cleaners used to be, that guy who sits there and sells stuff. You can open one of those. Like that. Has to be tamales. As the Gemara says, is that you can make a little store for the guy, but it's just so he can make a little bit of cash. Rav says, he's allowed to sell water in the marketplace of Arbus, Shmamina. We therefore can see from here that he's allowed to have a little parnasa. However, Mitzora, we haven't answered the question of Mitzora yet. What about a Mitzora as it relates to Talmud Torah? Mitzora ma'u b'divrei Torah. Toshma, the pasuk reads, "V'odatim levonecha b'livnei avanecha yom asher mativ Hashem elokecha b'chorei." Famed pasuk, "Malahalim be'ema v'yiro v'resas v'ziyah." Just like over there by Har Sinai, the Torah was learned in fear and in awe and in trembling and in sweat. The same is true. There's missing words here. The Gemara says the Hagos V'Tzionim on the side, Os Kattan Dalet adds in Afkan by a Mitzora be'ema b'yiro v'resa suvaziyah, that he is allowed to learn. Mikan Amru Hazavin, if there's a person who's a Zav b'hamitzorayin, if there's a Mitzora bo'alei nida, those people who would violate the very chamor halacha of being intimate with a woman who is a nida, mutarin likros b'torah v'nevim u'v'ksuvim, they're allowed to learn Torah. V'lishnos b'medrash b'talmud b'halachos u'v'agados, no limitations. However, bam shalav halacha u'ba'alei keri on asurin. But a person who's a Baal Keri, they're not allowed to learn. So is this Takanas Ezra or is this not Takanas Ezra? So take a look at Rashi, the last Rashi on the page. Dibur Hamaschel Baal Keri on Asurin says nothing about Ezra. What does Rashi say? Lefisha Balahem Machmas Simcha v'Kalus Rosh v'Leika Ema. Wow. Because a person had to behave in a fashion that was more Simcha or Kalus Rosh. In fact, some of the Meforshim on this Gemara say, even if a person's a Baal Keri from Tashmish Amita, which is not only mutter, but a mitzvah at times, Afal Pikein, he still is not allowed to learn until he goes to the mikvah. How does this play out? I don't know. But it doesn't seem to be dependent on Takanas Ezra. Just from the diuk from Rashi. I'm saying that on my own. I don't know. If anybody has any other feelings, please share. Next, 8 lines from the bottom. Avel aser b'tichbo says you're not allowed to do laundry during avelus. Tichsiv va'ishlach Yoav tekoa. There's a whole famous story in Tanakh. Va'ikach misham isha chachama. He went over to a very wise woman. V'yimrei la his ablina. I'd like you to dress up like you're a mourner. V'liv shina big day avel. And I need you to wear clothes of an avel. What does it mean, clothes of an ovel? We'll see soon. Ve'al tasuchi shemen, you should not put on any perfumes or oils. You should act and pretend and pose to be like a woman who has been in avelus for many days. What about a person who's a menuda or a mitzora? Are they allowed to do laundry? They're not allowed to get haircuts. They're not allowed to do laundry. Next, avel chayv b'kriya. 3 lines from the bottom, Tez Vav Amud Aleph. An avel is obligated to tear kriya upon a mace. With Rahman al-Islam, a parent, they tear on the left side, and with everybody else, they tear on the right. Some of the poskim write that if you're a doctor and you work in an environment where you are present for Yetzias Neshama, that even though you may see many Yetzias Neshamas over the course of the day, whatever profession you're in, you should tear a little bit on the bottom of your shirt, just tiny little cuts. It doesn't have to be a full tefach cut. Normally we tear a tefach, but it doesn't have to be full, but just a little cut in the bottom, that there should be a little recognition. But anyways, this is the basic din. It's not a subtlety. This is the basic din that Avel Chai B'Kriya. How do we know? You're not allowed to defame your clothes. That implies that everybody else is cutting their clothes. Menuda mahu b'kriya. What's the din by a menuda? When a person gets put into nidui, does he have to tear kriya? Teku? We don't know. Says the Gemara, Mitzora mahu b'kriya. What about Mitzora? Tashma begadav yufurumim shiyu mikurai shmamina, should definitely be torn. Avel chai b'kfiyas hamita. An avel has to turn over his bed. So says the Gemara, what is this talking about? The Tani Bar Kapara, as we turn to the top of Tezvav Amud Beis, Demusti Yukni Nasrati Behem. Rashi, B'Tselem Elokim Asa Adam. Pasuk in Breshis, Hashem says, I made everyone like me. Uve'avonoseim hafachtiha. And in their sins, I ended up flipping them over from being alive to being dead, and therefore, Kafu mitosein aleha. We have to turn over the beds. This is not something that we do nowadays either. First of all, most of our mattresses are reversible, so I don't even know that it's much of a raya. If you have a very good mattress, it's not, but the basic ones you buy at the store, you can flip them over. I think mine actually, I don't know. I never looked at the bottom of my mattress. I don't have a pillow top. Yeah, I don't know. They're very uncomfortable. I don't know. Pillow tops? We'll vote about this later. So the Gemara says that one should turn over their bed. What about a menuda and a mitzora? Do they turn over their beds? Mahin b'kfiyas hamita teiku. We don't know the answer to that. Avel asar b'asiyas malacha. An avel should not really be doing work. T'chsiv, how do we know? V'alfachti chagechem le'evel. This is what death does. For the avel, it flips their chag into evel. Machag asar b'malacha. Af evel asar b'malacha. Seems to be a strong comparison. Menuda mahu b'asiyas malacha. What will we say about a menuda? Someone in excommunication, does he have an isser malacha? So Amar of Yosef Toshma. The Brisa writes, in regards to tinus, when we said that it was usher by a tinus, that it's usher b'asiyas malacha lo amar b'yom aval b'layla mutter. It's only a problem during the day, but not at night. And we have the same din that applies by menuda and avel, implying that maybe there is some type of isser malacha by a menuda and a mitzora. Says the Gemara, my lava kulu, isn't the comparison between menuda and avel full as it relates to the world of tinus? Says the Gemara, lo ashara. I was only talking about certain things, but you can't bring a raya brura that really that there's an isser malacha by menuda and by mitzora, or by menuda at least. Tashma, let's try again. Menuda shonen b'shonen la, niskar v'niskarin la, shmami no. We see that you're allowed to be hired for work. Shmami no, that a menuda is allowed to work. That is a very clear answer. What about a mitzora? 12 lines down. Ma'u b'asiyas malacha teku. We don't know the answer to that question as to whether or not there was any isser malacha by a mitzora. Would have thought we would have had more information on that. We have mitzorayim in the Torah. Miriam, we have cases. It's just, there's nothing in Chumash, obviously. There's nothing at all. We have no information on whether or not there is an Isser Malacha by someone who is a Mitzora. And nowadays, there's no Tzoras anyways, because you need a Kohen to paskin on you, even if it looks like Tzoras, even if you fulfilled all the requirements, this color hair, that color wound, whatever. Doesn't matter nowadays, but we do need to find out Bikarov, because people will have leprosy, unfortunately, unless we all stop speaking Lashon Hara. Next, Avel Aser B'Rechitza, an Avel is not allowed to wash themselves. The pasuk says, this was the pasuk about the woman in Tekoa, that he said to her that she should not put oils on her, and Rechitza B'Chlal Sicha, and washing oneself is close to, but not the same as, but still close enough as it relates to Sicha. Menuda Mahu B'Rechitza. What about a person who's been nidu? Is he allowed to shower? Rabbi Yosef Tashmak Shamar Aser B'Rechitza. When we said by a tinus that one is not allowed to be rochetz their body, lo Lo amru ela kol gufo. We only have a limitation to wash their whole body. Aval panav yodav v'raglav mutter. But maybe, but one is allowed to wash their face, their hands, and their feet. That is mutter. That's halacha l'maisa for an avel as well. And then the Brisa says the same is true by menuda and avel. My lava kuru. Don't we make the comparison in full from tainus to the world of menuda uve'evel? So says the Gemara, no, lo ashara. It was only some things, but not all things. So you can't learn anything from this Brisa. What about a mitzora mahu berachitza? Is a mitzora allowed to take a shower? Teku, don't know. 4 lines before the wide lines. 2 more sugas, and then we're going to stop for the night. We're going to stop about 6-7 lines before the bottom of the page. Avel, Aser ben Ilas, a sandal, and Aser Avel is not allowed to wear leather shoes. Yechezkel was told to put his shoes on, that others are not supposed to. The person in excommunication, is he allowed to wear leather shoes? Says the Gemara, Amar of Yosef Toshma, the Brisa writes, that when one is forbidden during the times of a tainus, again, this is another Gemara, this is a Tosefta from Maseches Tainus, from Maseches Tainus, that when one is not allowed to wear shoes, that's only true be'ir. Aval b'derech, if you're walking and you're going to get injured, then of course you can wear shoes, mutter, no problem. What's the din? How do you execute this? Yatsa l'derech noel nichnas le'ir choletz. When you start to leave the city limits, you can take off your shoes, and when you come back in the city, when you start to leave the city limits, you can put on your shoes. When you come back into the city, you can take off your shoes. And then the Brisa says again this vague line, so maybe we can learn from here that there's an isra of ni'ilas asandal, my lava kulu. Isn't the comparison from the world of tainus to the world of menuda and evel full? Says the Gemara, no, it's not. Lo ashar, it's only talking about other things, but lav dafka this point of ni'ilas asandal. Says the Gemara, what about a mitzora? Mitzora b'mahu b'ni'ilas asandal teku. Look how many tekus we have by a mitzora. We're missing so much information. Nobody wrote a book about the last mitzora, but it was so long ago. It's a nidui. That's a din in Shulchan Aruch. We talk about nidui. We have people who we excommunicate now. That's maybe it's not identical, but we do have a shamta. We do put people into excommunication. People who make their wives agunos. There's a whole slew of things that people do to become anyone who's Masari Bezdin. They can be put into shamta. They can put into nidui. Next, halfway down, Avel Aser b'tash mishamita. An Avel is not allowed to have tash mishamita throughout Shiva. Says the Gemara, Dechsiv, how do we know that this is true? Vayinachim David es Basheva ishto. He did nichum avelim for Basheva, and only afterwards Vayavo eleha were they intimate. Nichlal d'mei ikara aser, that during the primary time of Shiva, that it is aser for tash mishamita. Asks the Gemara, Manuda mau b'tash mishamita. What about a person in excommunication? Can they be intimate? Amar Rav Yosef Tashma kol osan shanam shahayu yisrael b'midbar. We know that the Jews, the whole time that they were in the midbar, they were treated as excommunicated as it relates to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'shim shumito saying, and they had children. That's what the Rishonim say when it says v'shim shumito saying. We don't know that they had tashmish because we know they had tashmish. We just know that a lot of children were being born. So therefore, there's no immaculate conception. So we therefore know that they were having children. Just got a phone call today from a woman. Mazel tov, tell me about your family. She says, yeah, I'm Jewish. My mother's Jewish and my father's a convert, and I've chosen to be a single mom. So she got a sperm donation. She went to a sperm bank and she picked out tall, dark, and handsome, and she just had this person's baby. So that's not Tash Meshamita. These are big shilos in poskim, and there were some. That's why we have organizations like Machon Pua. Their job is to make sure that the right zera is paired with the right egg, because otherwise you have these funky shilos that come up in halacha. It's not so simple.
So you could do that first.
Baby's a Jew. Yeah, baby's a Jew. We rely on the leda. We don't really look at anything else pretty much. Even if the genetic material was from a goy, even if the egg was from a goy. Even if it was a full supplant, right? We swapped out her genetic material too, because this happened. This was the case from France. I told this story about the 2 men who called me and they had a surrogate and they made sure the surrogate was Jewish. Or they made sure the surrogate was not Jewish, but the genetic material was Jewish. The baby's a Goydores. And I was the bad guy who had to tell them that their baby's not Jewish. Needless to say, I did not do that circumcision, but they were pretty upset. Anyways, we know that they had Tash Mishamita in the desert. Amar le Abaye. Abaye seems to flip on his head right here. V'dilma menuda l'shamayim shani dekil. Maybe we should say, no, in the midbar it was more lenient. Says the Gemara, have you been paying attention, Abai? 10 minutes ago, you just argued the other way. Kiel, the Amris Chamir. A few days ago, a few minutes ago, you said that stuff from Shamayim, Xeris from Shamayim are Chamir. They're not Kal. What are you talking about? It says the Gemara, he wasn't sure. Sfuke Misafkal. He didn't know whether or not a Xera from Shamayim was worse or better than something from Bezdin. So therefore, Zil Hacha Kemadchile. If you talk to me in one direction, I'll use the opposite argument. The Zil Hacha Kemadchile, and if you give me the other direction, I'll push in the other. I don't know. I'm using it as a point of questioning. I don't know the answer to the question. Fine. Says the Gemara, Mitzorah Mal B'Tashma Shamita. What's the din by a Mitzorah? Tashma. The Brisa writes, Tanya V'Yashav Michutz La'Ohalo. He sat outside of his tent. She had Kimnud V'Avel. So therefore it's aser. We know that the word ohel means isha, reference to a wife. That after Har Sinai, Moshe told the Jews that they could again be intimate again. Shmamina, that he's not allowed to be involved in intimacy. So let's learn from here. Let's learn from this case about a menuda where we didn't have clarity. Same answer as before. It doesn't say it's categorically aser. It just says that there are similarities, but it's it's by other things. And when it says that was not talking about the case of menuda, it was talking about the case of mitzorah. We'll stop right here, 8 lines from the bottom. Tomorrow night we're going to learn Daf Tez Zayin, which is really Friday's block, and then Friday morning we're going to learn Daf Yud Zayin, which is Shabbos's blot, and then we will pick up again Sunday night. Wishing you all a beautiful night.